Hello everyone, my name is Azarain and thank you for stopping by the channel. I just want to say first off that the views, likes, and comments in the last video was so awesome to see. I know that 300 views in 2 days might not seem like a lot, but it's definitely a lot to me. So thanks for watching and make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Anyway, now to get into what you came here for. To continue the theme of playstyle tips in Commander, today we're going to be going over 5 tips to effectively playing Control with 3 other people at a Commander table. This video will serve as a guide for those of you who love playing Control, like me, but maybe your playgroup doesn't like how you play Control. I mean, the basis of the archetype is that you're not doing anything. You're reacting to everyone else's threats, and you're making sure that they don't run away with the game. You're essentially stopping your opponents from playing until they're gassed out, and then you choose the right moment to sweep away the game. In a 1v1, Control is completely different than a 4-player game. If you're like me and love playing Control but don't want your friends to hate you, here are 5 easy tips to play Control in EDH. First off, let's make sure that everyone knows what Control is. Control doesn't necessarily mean blue counter spells. Control comes in every color. Blue usually has counter spells, black kills, white exiles, green usually hits enchantments and artifacts, and red burns. Control comes in all colors, but it's the decks that are dedicated to the archetype that I'll be referring to in today's video. Tip number 1. Don't be that guy who tells everyone to wait, and then he thinks about letting their spell resolve. You will honestly just be a nuisance to the table, and sooner or later, your 3 other opponents are going to try and kill you so they don't have to constantly worry about counterspells, or just because they think that you're being annoying. And I'll move to cast Jace the Mind Sculptor. Wait! Yeah, it can resolve. Okay. Then I'll use his +2. Hold on! Yeah, go ahead. I'll allow it. Alright, I'm tired of this. Can we just kill this guy already? Tip number 2. Don't be smug when you counter spell or kill something. Something that will drive your opponents into a frenzy of rage, seeking to destroy you in your current games and maybe even future games if they end up holding a grudge, is if you act like you are so cool after making them not play Magic all night. Doing this enough times will probably make the other 3 players really annoyed that you're answering all of their threats, and sooner or later, they're going to end up making a deal with each other and try and team up and take down the guy who's controlling and they don't get to play Magic. Instead, I would recommend to try and be apologetic and tell them it was too good of a card, that you couldn't let it resolve, that if you let it resolve, you would end up losing the game. Something that Commander players love is when you talk about their deck. A lot of work and money is put into a Magic deck. I always love complimenting someone's deck or a certain card to get some heat off of me when I'm going to play Control. Oh, cool, you're playing the foil alternate art Smothering Tithe? That is an amazing card, and I love the new art that they made for it. This one definitely needs a reprint, but honestly, if I don't take care of that now, I think you will really run away with this game, so I'm gonna have to counterspell it. That sounds a lot better than, boom, counterspell, what are you gonna do about it? Put that card into the graveyard, loser. Tip number 3, have a plan for how you're going to use your counterspells or kill spells. A rule that I like to follow, and it may change based on the game or the players that you're up against, and honestly, even the time of day that you end up playing, is using your removal to protect yourself in the moment. Like, for example, if a kill spell is coming at you or a creature an opponent plays will directly affect your board state or ability to play, then you can use that to justify countering or killing that spell. If you're just countering a spell just to play a counter spell, that's when your opponents will start to see you as a nuisance and not someone they want alive in the pod. Another rule that I like to follow is to use your removal to target a player who might play really powerful decks or who might be in the lead at the current moment. Using your control politically can carry some favor with the other players at the table. If you try and slow down the person who may be jumping out to an early lead, others might see your control as helping them, and you form almost like a team at that point, and they may be less likely to target you since you did them a sort of favor by hitting the person in the lead. Taking into account the group power level and your opponent's game knowledge can determine the level of control you use on the people you're playing with. For example, if you sit down in a group and you know that one of your friends has at least 4 years of playing experience and generally builds pretty mid to upper level decks, you might tend to favor your removal toward that player rather than the other 2 people in your pod who just upgraded their precons last week. Even if they played powerful spells, it's nice to let less experienced players see how powerful some cards can be in Magic and why they should be answered in more experienced games. Tip number 4. Don't just play a land and pass. Doing this might slow down the game to a grueling pace as your opponents might be afraid to cast anything into your untapped lands. This will cause everyone to play super cautiously and nothing will happen for 3 hours and everyone will have to go home before more games can even happen. Act like you're struggling to decide how to advance your board state or hold up some sort of control. Acting like you don't know what the right move could be could alleviate some pressure from your opponents and allow them to play the game more freely. This will make the players around you lower their guard if they think you don't have some control in your hand and may play their bigger, more greedy spells into your trap if you know the card needs to be answered. To cap off this point, I'm not meaning don't leave lands untapped at any point. I'm meaning don't be that guy who's sitting on 6 untapped lands, you play your land for the turn and pass. I would make sure to include in your control decks things like mana reducers, mana producing artifacts, card draw engines, and then make sure that you leave a few mana up for your control spells. But leaving an entire board of untapped lands and not doing anything on your turn is definitely going to make you that guy at the table. Tip number 5. Don't be so quick to use your own removal. Even though you may have come to the table prepared to remove all of the threats, don't do it too quickly. I like to use my instance, at instant speed. A good control mage will always wait until the last second to answer a threat and use a spell in their hand. There's no point of immediately throwing down your swords to plowshares when someone else, who might be closer than you in turn order, uses their hero's downfall to take care of a huge creature. Then, an opponent just unknowingly helped you by using a card in their hand and taking out another player's threat. You don't want to get the reputation as being the board police all the time. Other players will know you probably have an answer and just simply wait for you to take care of the threat instead of doing it themselves. Special bonus tip: make sure you have a way to win. The worst way to play against control in a 4-player game is when the control mage is dictating the game and they have no way to close it out. When removal is flying and you've taken care of all of the threats around the table and it gets back to your turn and you just do nothing, the game will drag on and your opponents will hate you even more than they already do. Put some big game-ending spells or combos in your deck that you know will move on to game 2. You don't want to be sitting there for 3 hours with just searching through your deck trying to find a way to close out the game. You want to know your path to victory, control the early game, control the mid game, make it to the late game, and get a victory. And those are my 5 easy and practical tips of using control in Commander that will hopefully help you stay in the game longer and not make your friends hate sitting down with you to play EDH. Now I'd like to take this time to go over some really cool control commanders for EDH. Alright, first up on our control commanders list is going to be NIVMIS Perrin. Now, NIVMIS is definitely intimidating to look at first. He's 6 mana, and he's blue, 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 red, 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 so he has no generic cost. He's a 5/5 flying dragon wizard that can't be countered. Now, NIVMIS says whenever you draw a card, NIVMIS deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Now, I know that there's a combo with NIVMIS, but we're not talking about combo. We're talking about control. So NIVMIS does some cool things for us as control mages. So he can't be countered, so others can't control him very easily. They're going to have to use a spell once he's already resolved. He has flying, so he has evasion. He can block. He's a big body. He's a 5/5. And whenever we draw a card, he's going to deal 1 damage to any target. So if we end up drawing a lot of cards, we can hit a weaker player, or we can start hitting smaller utility creatures, or like I said, even if we end up drawing a lot of cards, we can kill a bigger creature with NIVMIS' ability. He can target anything, so on him he's just dealing the damage when we're just playing the game. So he incentivizes us to play the game, and then he'll just do work for you. Then his other line of text says, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, which includes us, we draw a card. So whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, which is most likely what we're going to be doing, we draw a card and deal 1 damage. Then when someone else tries to answer our threats with their counter spells or their control, we're going to draw another card and deal another damage. So we can start targeting, we can use NIVMIS as sort of a turret and just point him around the table, point him at certain threats. We can just play our deck, draw cards, get card advantage, see more of our deck to get more answers. NIVMIS is also going to help us answer threats on the table. So he's kind of this dual threat of our cards are going to do the work, and he is going to do work with us. Next up on this list is probably the one that you were all thinking of, Brawl, Chief of Compliance. Brawl is kind of nuts. Brawl is 2 mana, so he's always going to come down on turn 2. He's a 1/3, so he's actually got a good return on blocking. He says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so he just reduces all the spells that we're going to want to be playing down 1 generic mana. And then he also says, whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may loot, so you may draw a card and then discard a card. So Brawl is basically encouraging us to play every counterspell in the game, and when we do so, we are also just going to start filtering through our deck. We're going to start seeing more cards. Now, Brawl doesn't do as much as NIVMIS, obviously, because NIVMIS is 6 mana and Brawl is 2, but for a 2 mana commander, playing in mono blue, so we get access to all the counterspells that we could ever want, Brawl is going to make sure that we are drawing our counterspells and we're ditching the cards we don't need. So if we need a land and we have 4 lands in our hand, we keep the 1 land, and then we counter a spell, take care of a threat, we draw a card, we discard a land, and then we get something in our hand that we actually want. Now, I don't really need to spend a lot of time breaking down Brawl. He's very self-explanatory. It says right on the card, hey, I'm a low mana creature. I'm going to make your stuff cheaper and easier to cast by 1 mana, and when you counter spells, when you take care of the threats, I'm going to reward you by letting you see more of your deck. Next up is going to be most likely a lot of people's favorite control mage, Kess, the Dissident Mage. Now, Kess is 4 mana. She's 1 generic and Grixis, so she's blue, black, and red. She's a human wizard with flying on a 3/4 body, so she's actually got a pretty powerful return on her flying. She's able to block, and she's got a little bit of damage there with the 3 power. During each of your turns, you may cast an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. This is an insanely powerful effect in some of the best control colors in Magic. Kess is going to allow you to use your control spell from your hand, and then you get to use it again from your graveyard. Again, Kess is very much like Brawl, where what she wants is very much on the face of her card. There's not really any trickery. There's not really anything where I can say, oh, here's some tips and tricks of Kess. It says it right there. You just get to double spell. So in Commander, the thing about Commander which makes it so special of a format is that it's singleton. So we only get 1 copy of each card. And usually for decks, that's saying, hey, I'm going to cast my card once, and then that powerful effect is used up, and now I have to find a way to get that back. And Kess says, no, I basically have 2 copies of every card in my hand. Any card that I draw, I'm going to have 2 copies of, because I'm going to cast it, and then I get to recast it again. Kess, insanely powerful, amazing colors for control. Nothing really else to say about Kess. She's great for those starter players who are probably looking to get more into control because she's just so easy to play. But the warning about Kess is that she is so powerful, and a lot of people have a lot of experience playing against very powerful Kess decks. So if you do decide to build Kess, make sure that you're going to be comfortable with that target on your back. Next is actually a newer commander from one of the standard sets. It's Hinata, the Dawn Crowned. Hinata's the same mana cost as Kess, so she's 4 mana. She's 1 generic, and then Jeskai, so blue, red, and white. Hinata is a Kithrin spirit, 4/4 with flying and trample. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. Spells your opponents cast cost 1 generic more to cast for each target. Hinata is honestly kind of nuts, and I think her power level is definitely being seen in spaces like Standard, and I think she's going to break into Commander in this way of, if you play X spells that target something, so I know that there are spells that say X, blue, tap target creature. And then you can pay X, X is 5, you tap 5 target creatures. Hinata basically says the X is no longer a factor. That spell is now just 2 blue mana, and Hinata says you get a free target. So if your opponents, let's say there's a token deck who has 20 creatures, and your other opponents combined have 10 creatures, so there's 30 creatures out, you get 1 generic less for each cast for each target. So what Hinata says, you pay 2 blue mana, you target all 30 creatures, your spell is basically a 30 blue, and you get to cast that for 2 mana, and you tap every creature on the board. Now there are a lot of effects in these colors. I'm not going to go through and break all of them down because this isn't a Hinata breakdown, but just effects like that, Hinata is so nuts. She now makes your targeted removal 1 mana less, so you can use things that target enchantments and artifacts and creatures. She's in great colors, so she exiles, she can burn, and red usually also takes care of a few things like artifacts, and then blue is obviously just your counter spells. And when a blue counter spell says counter target spell, it's targeting a spell, so Hinata will reduce that cost. Then on the other side, Hinata says spells your opponents cast that target cost 1 more to cast. So now my 1 mana Swords to Plowshares that I was keeping open for a big thing now cost 2 mana to destroy something of yours. Hinata is great value to reduce your costs, and then says everyone else's cost is now increased. Hinata shares a lot in common with the last commander that we're going to touch on today, which is going to be the classic stacks commander that you all know and love in the white-blue colors. It is Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. Now, Grand Arbiter is known to just be a centerpiece of control and stacks. He's 4 mana, so 2 white and a blue. Legendary creature, Human Advisor. He's a 2/3, so he's not the biggest creature, but I don't think you're really using him to attack or block. Grand Arbiter says white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. So this card's really similar to Hinata because it's going to reduce both of your costs. So if it's a white spell, it's 1, blue spell, it's 1. If it's white and blue, it's 2 less. And the great thing about Grand Arbiter is it doesn't say, like Hinata, you have to target things, or instant and sorcery like Brawl. Grand Arbiter says if your spell is white, it costs 1 less. If it's a creature, if it's an artifact, enchantment, whatever, Grand Arbiter is going to make sure to reduce that cost for you. And to get white and blue down 1 mana is going to be pretty great. It's almost like ramp. It's letting you cast spells for a reduced cost, obviously, so you're playing them earlier. And then Grand Arbiter also does the inverse of that for your opponent. So he says, hey, you're going to cast your Commander Sphere on turn 5 for 3 mana. Nope, it's going to be 4 mana now, and you're going to be even farther behind. Now you don't get to double spell with your mana rock. You're going to have to play your mana rock and then sit there and do nothing. Or now you have to hold up more mana for your control, whereas my control is now cheaper. There's nothing really more to say about Grand Arbiter. He's very popular in the stacks lockdown kind of style of decks that want to make your opponents have to get more advantage to just play their basic spells, and then you get to play your spells obviously at a discount, so you are accelerated while your opponents are a turn behind. And I think that rounds out the video. Thank you for watching. If you like what I'm trying to do here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you'd like to see next. Make sure to stay tuned because the next video that I'm working on is going to teach you how to be that guy at the commander table. This video was how to play control more effectively against 3 other players, but the next video, I want to go over how to just be mean and ruthless with your control, because some people honestly do like that kind of stuff. So I want to go over the tips that I've learned if you just want to be that classic control mage, that grinning, scheming control mage who's sitting with the 2 blue lands untapped for the entire game. Thank you for watching.